Luther Burden is falling a little bit in mock drafts, but we'll tell you why he shouldn't fall in your rookie drafts next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we are taking a look at Missouri wide receiver Luther Burden III, who just a couple months ago, Kate, was like a consensus top 10, top 12 player in this class. But if you looked at mock drafts over the last 2 weeks or so, pretty frequently you'll see him being drafted outside of round 1 or falling into the 30s. We'll talk about that in a second. But when you turned on the tape, what did you see from Luther Burden?
Luther Burden is absolutely dynamic after the catch. He's the type of wide receiver that you just want to get the ball in his hands, see what he can do afterwards. 21 years old, coming out of Missouri. He's a junior, former 5-star recruit, 6 foot, 206 pounds. And where he wins is with that dynamic playmaking ability, that top end athleticism that's going to make it really hard for defenders to stop him at any point once you get that football in his hands.
There are always a player or two every year, Kate, that it gives me a little twinkle in my eye. Like, it almost makes me tear up talking about them. Yeah. Previous winners of this award have been Sam Laporta, Ladd McConkey. Mm-hmm. Not to say this is a perfect metric.
We dub it like the Thierry Award.
Yeah, this is the Marcus Mosher Thierry Award. I just
coveted by most.
Yeah, it's very hard to get. There are certain players that just give you a lot of joy when watching football, and that's Luther Burden for me, because he is so dynamic with the ball in his hands. And I what you see is somebody that not only can run through arm tackles, he can run away from players, he can make you miss, and that's just a pretty rare ability. He really feels like a running back with the ball in his hands, and he's got explosive speed. We saw at the NFL Combine a 4.41 40-yard dash at 206 pounds. Like, we'll take that all day. But where I think he's different from like Malachi Corley, who I know a lot of people have compared him to, is that you see him do a lot of really good wide receiver things, including track the ball over his shoulder. He can really adjust to the football in the air. He'll attack the ball. He'll make hands catches. He'll fight through contact. He'll make contested catches. So he is not this is a project player that you have to specifically design touches for. You want to do that because Luther Burden's a really good player, but he can also function as a outside receiver, as a slot receiver. And it's why somebody like him, as a 19-year-old in the SEC, had 1,300 yards in 2023. Like, this is a very, very good player. Now, I think there's some concerns, Kate, about like how far away is he as a route runner? Because that Missouri offense is not overly complex. You don't see him winning against like press coverage very often. And to be fair, not a lot of receivers coming out of college do. So I think there is a concern of like, how far away is he as an NFL route runner before we can build an offense around? And I understand that. But in the meantime, you can give him slants. You can give him screens. You can run deep routes. You can run post routes and over routes. And he's going to be really effective for your offense.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at for a player like Luther Burden is, we have the history of production, as you mentioned, as a 19-year-old in the SEC, had a breakout campaign. We know breakout age can correlate really well to NFL success. The earlier you become a dominant feature in your collegiate offense, the more productive we generally see you be at the next level. So that's a great trait. You mentioned the traits, the athleticism. These are, I think, the things you're betting on for a player like Luther Burden is the traits. And obviously, again, not a perfectly refined prospect. No. You mentioned he can play on the outside, but primarily played out of the slot there in Missouri. So almost kind of like a Jackson Smith and Jigba type, where you knew, you thought he had the traits. He's a better athlete than, I think, more top end speed, I think, than Jackson Smith and Jigba, but similar question marks. And what you saw based on his collegiate usage, why didn't you see him more on the outside? Why didn't you see him utilized more on the boundary? Can he play?
Because I don't think the quarterback could have got him the ball there. Honestly, I think that's the issue. And if you watch Missouri in 2024, the quarterback play, the offensive design was so bad.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because that is a big, I think, a point worth noting for Luther Burden. Looking at his collegiate stats, 8+ scrimmage touchdowns in each season. He does have 2 seasons with 2 rushing touchdowns. We love that. But he did take a step back in 2024. Tell us about the quarterback play.
Bad, very bad. Their quarterback, Brady Cook, who was at the NFL Combine, actually ran the fastest 40 of all the quarterbacks, which is great. The problem is he couldn't throw. And he really struggled to throw the ball on the outside, and it really limited what this offense did. I believe they had 13 total passing touchdowns in 2024. And you see that Burden had 6 of those 13 or 14. I don't remember the exact number. We also just saw the targets go way down. Defenses were keying more on Luther Burden. And I think there's part of this where some people are wondering, did he check out a little bit because the offense was so much worse in 2024 than 2023? I think that's possible. But what you saw is somebody who was super dynamic as a sophomore. But one of the other things that you really like to see, Kate, is that there is a long history of players in college who are successful kick and punt returners on top of being NFL receivers, translating to the NFL. It's one of these things that is a telltale sign that you're going to be successful at the next level. And that was Burden. He was awesome as a punt returner at Missouri. And that just makes me feel even more confident that he's going to be a great player in the NFL.
Ranked 5th in punt return yards as a true freshman in the SEC. In 2022. So you feel that, right? That is a fantastic skill to tell us, not just about your dynamic ability to maneuver and all that, but it's also a great tell of how you see the field. And I think that's another aspect of Burden's game that we enjoy. So I have to imagine, Marcus, I don't know if anybody wants a little behind the scenes look. So Marcus obviously already gave Luther Burden the Thierry, the coveted Marcus Mosher Thierry Award. For those of you, we record using a recording platform. We have to assign a name. We have to assign a title to each recording that we have. Marcus, can you tell us about the title for today's show?
Yeah, it's Luther Burden the Go. I'm a huge fan. I'm going to give you an example of why I think he's different than a lot of the receivers in this class. You can see on tape, they'll run from the slot, just little stop routes, 7-yard stop routes. Again, nothing overly complicated. But if you watch those routes, he's so good at catching the ball, sinking his hips, and then getting back upfield. And if you watch all of the receivers in a row, I've asked you to go do this. Just watch the highlights on YouTube. Watch Ted McMillan, watch Emeka Buke, watch Matthew Golden, and then watch Luther Burden. He just moves differently than all of those guys. Matthew Golden ran a 4.29, and he doesn't move the way that Burden does on the football field. And there are only a couple guys in the league that move like this at over 200 pounds. And I think that's why he's such a fascinating player to me. We'll talk about some comps here in a little bit. But usually the kind of comps that this guy gets are guys that we want in our fantasy leagues and our dynasty leagues. And again, we'll get to that in a little bit.
For sure. Now, I think we've already gushed over kind of the player, the tape, the advanced metrics back that up, Marcus. So I think we should hit those next.
Let's get to it. This episode is brought to you by Chewy. You've probably heard of Chewy. They really do have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy, whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even health or pet healthcare. Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable. With over 100,000 products from all of your favorite brands, Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food to treats to toys to beds and grooming. And it's not just for dogs and cats. They've got supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, and small pets too. Chewy also makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth visits, and even in-person vet clinics rolling out nationwide. And auto ship is a game changer. You can set up automatic deliveries for food, treats, or any essentials so that you never run out, and you can easily change or cancel at any time. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. And right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. Save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are discussing Luther Burden, who, again, I admit I'm biased here. This is one of my favorite players in the class. Cable, what do the analytics say about Luther Burden?
The analytics are just as boastful as you would expect them to be based on Marcus's glowing review of Luther Burden, the GOAT. Marcus, I think we should probably get his name changed legally to that, just for, I don't want to be caught up in any,
no legal scandals here. Yeah.
No, receiving grade. Let's talk about the percentiles over the last 2 years. 86th percentile PFF receiving grade, 92nd percentile grade against single coverage, 94th percentile open target rate, 88th percentile drop rate, 87th percentile yards after the catch per reception. That paints a perfect picture of who he is as a player and why, again, you just want to get the ball in his hands and allow him to be Luther Burden in the open field.
Usually we don't see players with this profile very often. And one of the things that we've learned over the last 5 to 7 years is that this metric, yards after catch per reception, is very sticky. If you perform well after the catch in college, you're generally going to perform well in the NFL. And that's where Luther Burden excels. The difference is, Kate, we don't see players with this type of receiving grade or success against single coverage very often. And again, I'm going to compare him to Malachi Corley, who is just a lesser player than this. Malachi was awesome after the catch, but he was not a complete receiver. And that's what you see from Luther Burden, is somebody who's not a complete receiver yet, but he's got all the tools and the traits to be able to do so. There's another couple metrics that I love, and there's 3 of them. And I like to see a receiver hit all 3 of these above the 50th percentile. It's college dominator rating, 74th percentile, college target share, 80th percentile, breakout age, 94th percentile. Generally, the players that hit all 3 and come from big schools, or from a big conference like the SEC, Big 12, Big 10, the hit rate of those guys is unbelievable. I mean, there are very, very few even average players that hit all 3 of those. So when you combine that with the stable metrics from PFF that you just told us, there's not a lot not to like here.
It paints a fantastic picture. And college dominator rating, as you mentioned, 36.5%, 74th percentile for wide receivers. That is a combined percentage of total team receiving yards and team receiving touchdowns. So basically, it's an indication of, like, are you taking over your respective program's offense? And Luther Burden, pretty much from the jump, was a big, big part of that Missouri offense. Breakout age tells you at what point they post for the first time a dominator rating at or above 20%. 18.7 is absolutely absurd for this kind of metric. 94th percentile. All of these things tell a fantastic story. Now, a couple of things that, like, maybe they're not advanced metrics, but things that I also want to point out from a percentile standpoint. Marcus, let's talk about the hands. Let's talk about the arm length. Arm length, 31 inches. That's 36th percentile for wide receivers. And then we have the 8.5-inch hands. Do either of those give you any pause for concern at the next level?
I mean, ideally, you would like to see him have bigger hands and longer arms. I mean, that's just obvious, right? The thing is, it hasn't impacted him too much at Missouri. He doesn't drop a lot of passes. He's not a contested catch receiver, although he can do it. That's just not really what his game is built on. So, again, it's not ideal, but I don't think it's going to be the reason he fails in the NFL by any stretch.
And here's the thing. When you have a pretty high open target rate. We have a 94th percentile separation percentage. Again, 92nd percentile against single coverage. Those contested catch situations don't happen as often because you're creating separation with your movement. He also has the speed to create that separation. So I think all of those things combined will generally tilt you in the right direction. So what in the world is happening with this player who seems to check just about every box when it comes to the NFL draft projections that we're seeing right now in the mock drafts? He is falling. So what gives?
I'm not sure. I'm looking at the consensus board from earlier in the year. So right now, this is from sorry, I pulled it up right now. This is from February 1. Okay. So not that long ago, right? Just over a month and a half ago. His overall ranking on that board was 10. Okay. Over the last overall 10th overall. He's now slid down to 20, which is a pretty big drop over the last month and a half. And it's not like he went to the combine and performed poorly and ran a 4.41. You've seen several expert mock drafts like Mel Kiper, Dane Brugler, Daniel Jeremiah leave him out of the first round entirely, where there were a lot of mock drafts in January and February where he was being mocked to the 49ers at 11 or the Cowboys at 12. I'm not sure. I've texted some people around the Missouri program to ask, like, hey, is there some off the field stuff that I didn't know about? And they said, no, he's never missed a practice, never missed a meeting. It couldn't have been a better teammate. Nothing there. So part of it, I think, is just the fit. Maybe there's just some teams out there that don't want to have to design an offense around him. But I was talking to a very well-respected NFL draft expert the other day, and they said it's nothing off the field. It's just, he could be somebody that goes at 15. He could be somebody that goes at 35. That's just what this draft is. So I don't think it's anything to be concerned about, but I do think there's a chance that we get to April and he's somebody that could go in the 20s or 30s where maybe we thought he could be a top 10 pick a month ago.
And what's interesting about that is this does kind of open the possibility of him going to a team, a franchise without a true number one wide receiver. We talked about this with our episode on Tetairoa McMillan, and weirdly enough, a lot of the teams that are drafting in the top 10, let's say, they already have their bona fide wide receiver one, right? They have a guy who's going to gobble up targets. Now, the further we get from that, like top 10, it does feel like there's a lot more potential in terms of landing spot for him to get one of these positions, one of these roles in the offense where he just absolutely gobbles up targets left and right. I think in full PPR formats, especially, Luther Burden is the type of guy that, might be, a perennial, 200 fantasy point floor for the years to come, just because I think he can be a player with a ton of volume.
I just want to mention some landing spots really quickly because I don't think he's going inside the top 10. Like, I don't think I see him going to the Raiders or anything like that. But you get to like 11, the 49ers. Like, to me, this is the perfect Deebo Samuel replacement, right? They're different, but similar, right? I think Dallas at 12 makes sense. But then you start to go through the next like group of teams, Kate, and this is where it's really strange.
Dallas at 12, I think I get you wanting Luther Burden, but it does feel like obviously him and CeeDee Lamb are very different
Just
players.
Let me live for a second.
It just feels a little duplicative. It feels duplicative.
I agree. But the problem is for Burden is that next group of teams, Miami, Indianapolis, Arizona, Atlanta, Cincinnati. We'll see about Seattle and Tampa Bay. Like, if Tampa Bay re-signs Godwin and Seattle doesn't trade DK Metcalf, I really don't see Burden going into that range. And now we're down into the 20s. And that's where, like, I think this fit is going to become interesting, because I could see a team like Pittsburgh or the Chargers being more interested in someone like Emeka Egbuka or Matthew Golden than Luther Burden. I say all this to say Burden could fall in the actual NFL draft, but it might be better for his dynasty value if he lands with a team with a good quarterback, with a good play caller. For example, like if he's in Houston as the number 2 receiver opposite of Nico Collins, I think that makes a lot of sense. If he lands with Baltimore and it's Zay Flowers and Luther Burden playing together, I think that makes a lot of sense as well. My fear is he's going to go to Philadelphia at 32, and I'm just going to hate myself.
No, absolutely not. No.
Okay, that's fine. Let's talk about his dynasty value right now, and we'll give you some of our favorite player comps for Luther Burden. I almost said my player comp. We'll give you our favorite player comps for Luther Burden next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Kate, let's talk about some comps for Luther Burden because you actually have a good one this time. Tell us what it is.
And this is a player that I love a lot. If you are an everydayer, if you've been around here with the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast here for a while, you're going to know this is a pretty high comp for me. It is Jayden Reed, wide receiver of the Green Bay Packers, went in the second round. But here's the thing about Luther Burden is he's like a juiced version of Jayden Reed. I could see them being very similar players at the next level in terms of their usage, in terms of what you want to see them do best. Like we've seen with the Green Bay Packers, I guess more particularly in the back half of his rookie season and first half of his second season, they just wanted the ball in his hands and allowed him to utilize his dynamic playmaking ability in the open field, right? Luther Burden is a much better athlete than Jayden Reed. So I think that tells you everything you need to know about his ceiling in general.
I like it. Again, everybody's going to say Deebo Samuel. It's not Deebo Samuel. I mean, because he's already a better pure receiver than what Deebo Samuel is. But he reminds me a lot of DJ Moore when Moore was coming out of Maryland because he didn't have the counting stats at Maryland because the quarterback play was so bad. But you look at the advanced metrics, and DJ Moore was 98th percentile dominator rating, 97th percentile breakout age, 100th percentile college target share. He was just this awesome athlete who was doing everything he could to boost up that offense. DJ Moore, 6 foot, 210, ran a 4.42. Sounds very similar to Luther Burden. I think the difference for me, and again, I really like DJ Moore, and I think that's the type of player he could become in the NFL. I think he's got better ball tracking ability, and I think he's a better playmaker when the ball is in the air. I think there's a hint, just a sprinkling of some Odell Beckham mixed in with DJ Moore.
That is a comp of the highest order.
Yeah,
that's rich.
I know, but it's that Odell Beckham in the 2014 draft was not viewed as like this top 10 player. He ended up going, I think, 12th to the Giants. A lot of people thought maybe there were some receivers that should have went ahead of him, but he just moved differently. And I kind of think that's the way that is the way I think of Luther Burden. This is a guy I just want to gamble on.
I think that's very fair. And I do think the ceiling for a player like Luther Burden is extraordinarily high. Now, the question is, how low do you think the floor could be? Because if he does land in an offensive system that isn't necessarily going to utilize his skill set all that well, like I think the Pittsburgh Steelers would be a terrible fit, even though they could really utilize, a wide receiver with that kind of athleticism, speed. Like they could technically use his skill set very much, but I don't think that the Pittsburgh Steelers, Arthur Smith, would utilize him to the best of his ability. So like, I think that would lower the floor. Landing spot feels like a pretty significant component of how highly or how low we value Luther Burden in our dynasty drafts, regardless of the skill set in the player.
My hope is that he plays a Rashee Rice type of role in the NFL where he's a big slot receiver that just wins off of athleticism. Because if you remember Rice coming out of SMU. He was not viewed as a very good route runner, but he was just this guy that had good ball skills, was good after the catch. The Chiefs put him in their offense, and it took the first half of his rookie season to kind of settle into that role. But that's what I'm hoping for Burden, is where you don't use him only on screens. You can do that whenever you want, but you actually let him be a receiver. My fear is, though, Kate, that yes, he gets pigeonholed into this guy that, hey, he's Cordero Patterson, or he's, I'm trying to think of another comp, or Jaden Reed, like early in Jaden Reed's career, where we can only throw short stuff and deep balls to him. I hope that doesn't happen.
And that's what I think is going to be key, is just finding the right offense that I think has an innovative play caller that is going to be able to work with that skill set. Now, one team that I do think is kind of an interesting fit, and we talked about this game with, this team with T-Mac yesterday about having some possible interest in the first round. What about the Jaguars in round 2, who just released Christian Kirk? You have a dynamic play caller in Liam Cohen. I think the Jaguars might be one of my low-key favorite fits. Like, again, you mentioned, the speed, that kind of component to his game, but like, I think he would complement the skill set of Brian Thomas Jr. there pretty well.
I agree. And this is where, to circle back to the dynasty value, going into the month of February, he was being drafted as wide receiver 2 behind T-Mac, way ahead of the guys like Emeka Egbuka and Matthew Golden. We don't have the latest batch of ADP yet, but I've got a feeling we're going to see all those guys grouped together. But I want Luther Burden of all these receivers. I'm willing to take Burden ahead of McMillan, ahead of Golden, because I do think he's going to eventually figure this out and be that Rashee Rice type of receiver, or DJ Moore, where he's an every down receiver that can make plays after the catch. My guess is, Kate, in your super flex rookie drafts, you're not going to have to take him until pick 6, 7, 8, just because of this running back class. And I think landing spot will be very important here. But if he goes at 11 to the 49ers, or 34 to the Jags, or 35 to the Jags, I'm just not going to care too much. There's not that big of a difference. Yeah. We've seen plenty of receivers get drafted at the top of the second round and be better than the guys that are drafted in the top. Perfect example. Rome Odunze went 9 last year. Ladd went 34. No way that you're taking Rome over Ladd right now. So landing spot's going to be more important than where Luther Burden gets drafted.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. Now, we've given some lofty comps. I think we've definitely made the case for why Luther Burden is a top 2 wide receiver in this class. I'm going to say he's my wide receiver 2, which does appear to be the consensus right now, though. I don't know. I do think the kind of second tier of wide receivers, McMillan is widely viewed wide receiver 1. I think that's pretty much consensus at this point. But I do think when you're looking at the rest of this group, they are so tightly knit between the Matthew Golden, the Egbuka. Like, I think this range is going to be one that you can kind of make the case for any guy, but I think you've presented the perfect case for Luther Burden to be prioritized in all of your rookie drafts.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.